Tonight, a man will make the biggest mistake of his life. Not because he lied, not because he cheated, but because he dumped a woman he never really knew. Over the next 3 hours, you'll witness a divorce turn into a disaster, a quiet wife become a powerful queen, and a confident man realize he's just awakened the demon of his mistake. This is a story of revenge without hatred, just truth. Watch until the end, hit like, and leave a comment about where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has come. Now, let's begin. The rain came down like nails against the kitchen window, each drop a sharp accusation in the silence. Elara Quinn stood barefoot on cold tile, her fingers wrapped around a wooden spoon that had gone still in the pot. The pasta was overcooking. She could smell it, that bitter edge when starch burns against steel. But she didn't move. Her body had locked up the moment she heard his car door slam outside. 7 years. 7 years to the day. She'd bought wine. Good wine. The kind that cost more than their weekly grocery budget. She'd changed the sheets. She'd shaved her legs in a bathtub that never got hot enough, the water going lukewarm halfway through, and she'd finished the job anyway because that's what you did when you were trying, when you still believed trying mattered. The front door opened. Marcus didn't call out. He never did anymore. She used to think it was because he was distracted, buried in case files and partnership politics, the kind of man who carried the world on his shoulders and sometimes forgot the woman waiting in the kitchen. But recently, maybe the past year, maybe longer, she'd started to understand it wasn't distraction. It was indifference. His footsteps moved through the hallway, expensive leather shoes against hardwood, the sound of a man who'd learned to walk like he owned every room he entered. Elara turned off the burner. The pasta could go to hell. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and tried to summon something that looked like a smile, something that didn't taste like defeat. When Marcus walked into the kitchen, he wasn't alone. He carried a black leather briefcase in his left hand and a manila folder in his right, the kind attorneys used for documents that mattered. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, the kind of fit that cost $3,000 and broadcast ambition to every partner at Whitmore and Vale. His dark hair was slicked back, still damp from the rain, and his jaw was set in that expression she'd come to recognize over the years, the look of a man about to deliver bad news and already bored by the inconvenience of it. "We need to talk," he said. Not happy anniversary, not sorry I'm late, not even hello. Elara's hands tightened on the dish towel. "I made dinner. I'm not hungry." "Marcus, sit down." It wasn't a request. It was the voice he used in depositions, the one that made witnesses crack and opposing counsel reconsider their strategies. Elara had heard him practice it on phone calls late at night when he thought she was asleep, his tone sharpening into a blade that could cut through excuses and hesitation. She sat. Marcus placed the briefcase on the counter but kept the folder in his hand. He didn't sit. He stood across from her like a lawyer presenting evidence, his posture straight, his expression neutral. Outside, thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows, and for a split second Elara thought about running. Just standing up, walking out the door, disappearing into the rain before he could say whatever he'd come here to say. But she didn't. She never did. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, his voice flat and clinical, "about where we are, about where I am. And I've come to the conclusion that this—" He gestured vaguely at the kitchen, at her, at the burnt pasta and the bottle of wine she'd left unopened on the counter. "Isn't working anymore." Elara's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've outgrown this." He opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers, and set them on the table between them. The top page had a bold header, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." "I've already signed. You just need to initial where the tabs are and sign at the bottom." The room tilted. Elara stared at the papers, at the cold legal language that reduced 7 years of her life to a series of checkboxes and notarized signatures. She tried to speak, but her throat had sealed shut, her lungs forgetting how to pull air. "I don't understand," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus sighed, the kind of sigh that said he'd expected this reaction and found it tedious. "Elara, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. We both know this marriage has been over for a while now. I need to move forward. I need to be with someone who fits the life I'm building." "Someone who fits?" "Yes. You mean someone who isn't me." "Exactly." The word landed like a fist. Not I'm sorry. Not. This is difficult. Just exactly. Delivered with the same tone he'd used to confirm a lunch reservation. Alara's hands were shaking now, the dish towel still clenched between her fingers like a lifeline. There's someone else. It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't flinch. Victoria Ashbourne. You wouldn't know her. Her family? I know who she is. And she did. Everyone knew the Ashbournes. They owned half of Manhattan's skyline, controlled real estate empires that stretched from Battery Park to the Bronx. The kind of old money that didn't just open doors, it built the entire goddamn building. Victoria Ashbourne was a fixture in society columns, photographed at galas and charity auctions, always draped in designer gowns that cost more than most people's cars. Marcus's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of surprise that Alara had recognized the name. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that same cold neutrality. Then you understand why this makes sense. Victoria and I are building something together, something significant, and I can't do that while I'm still tied to... He paused, searching for the right word. This, Ilara repeated. You mean me. I mean a life that doesn't serve my goals anymore. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the wine bottle, watch it shatter against the wall, let the Merlot bleed down the paint like an accusation. But instead, she just sat there, her body frozen, her mind spinning through memories that suddenly felt like lies. The night they met at a bar in Hoboken, Marcus buying her a drink and telling her she had the most interesting eyes he'd ever seen. The weekend trip to Cape May, where he'd proposed on the beach at sunset. The ring modest but thoughtful. His promises delivered with a sincerity she'd believed. The early years when he'd kiss her goodbye every morning, when he'd call during lunch breaks just to hear her voice, when he'd look at her like she was the answer to a question he'd spent his whole life asking. When had that changed? When had she become disposable? Sign the papers, Alara. Marcus's voice cut through her spiral. I've already arranged for movers to come next week. You can stay in the house until you find something else. I'll cover 3 months' rent, wherever you decide to go. After that, you're on your own. 3 months. It's generous. Generous. More than fair considering... Considering what? Alara's voice finally broke free, sharp and jagged. Considering I gave up everything for you? Considering I moved here, away from everyone I knew, because you said New Jersey was better for your career? Considering I spent 7 years making sure you had clean shirts and warm meals and someone waiting when you came home? Marcus's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. You're being a housewife. The word came out like an insult. And I need more than that now. I need a partner who understands the world I operate in, someone who can stand beside me at events, who knows how to talk to clients, who doesn't... He stopped himself, but the damage was already done. Who doesn't what? Alara stood now, her voice rising. Who doesn't embarrass you? Who doesn't remind you of where you came from? Who isn't ordinary? Yes. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. Exactly that. The rain hammered harder, a relentless drumbeat against the roof. Somewhere in the distance, lightning split the sky, illuminating the kitchen in a flash of white that made everything look skeletal, stripped down to bones. Alara picked up the pen he'd left beside the papers. Her hand was steady now, the shaking gone, replaced by something colder, something that lived deeper than anger, beneath heartbreak, in a place she'd kept locked for 7 years. She signed her name, not because she accepted it, not because she agreed, but because Marcus Hale had just made the worst mistake of his life, and he was too blind to see it. Congratulations, she said quietly, sliding the papers back across the table. You're free. Marcus picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold, glancing back one last time. For what it's worth, I did care about you. Once. Once isn't enough. He left without another word. The front door closed. His car started. Taillights disappeared into the rain, and Alara Quinn stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the burned pasta and the unopened wine, feeling the weight of 7 years collapse into a single moment of clarity. She walked upstairs. The bedroom was exactly as she'd left it. Sheets turned down, candles unlit, the anniversary card she'd bought sitting unopened on his pillow. She ignored all of it. Instead, she went to the closet, pushed aside the dresses she'd worn to firm events and dinners, where she'd smiled until her face hurt, and found the section in the back where her older clothes still hung. Behind them, hidden behind a false panel she'd installed herself years ago, was a safe. Her fingers moved across the keypad, entering the code from muscle memory. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside were things Marcus had never seen. Things no one had seen in 7 years. 3 passports, each with a different name, each with her face staring back under different hair colors and styles. A stack of black credit cards, the kind with no spending limits, no questions asked. 2 encrypted phones, their screens dark and dormant. A set of keys to properties scattered across 3 states. And underneath it all, wrapped in silk, was a driver's license that bore a name she'd buried the day she married Marcus Hale. Elena Vetrova. She picked up one of the phones, held the power button until the screen glowed to life. It took 3 minutes to boot up, running through security protocols that would erase everything if the wrong fingerprint touched the sensor. When it finally unlocked, there were no missed calls, no messages. She opened the contacts. There was only one number saved. She pressed dial. It rang twice. "I was wondering when you'd call." The voice on the other end was deep, accented, laced with something that sounded like satisfaction. "It's been a long time, Elena." Her real name. Hearing it out loud after 7 years felt like waking up from surgery, the anesthesia wearing off, pain rushing back into nerve endings that had gone numb. "I need to come home," she said. "Home is waiting." A pause. "He hurt you?" "He left me." A low chuckle, dark and dangerous. "Then he's a dead man." "No." Her voice was firm. "Not yet. Not like that." "Then how?" Elena looked at the divorce papers crumpled in her other hand, at the signature Marcus had scrawled without hesitation, at the life he'd discarded like it meant nothing. "I want him to understand what he threw away," she said quietly. "I want him to watch his perfect new life collapse. I want him to realize he had everything and destroyed it because he was too blind to see." "That," the voice said, "I can arrange. How soon can you send a car?" "It's already on the way." Elena ended the call. She stripped off the clothes she'd worn as Alara Quinn. The modest jeans, the simple blouse, the wedding ring that had left a pale indent on her finger. She left them in a heap on the floor like a shed skin. From the back of the safe, she pulled out a black dress, sleek and expensive, the kind of garment that whispered power instead of screaming it. She pulled it on, the silk cold against her skin, and looked at herself in the mirror. Alara Quinn stared back, soft features, uncertain eyes, the posture of someone who'd spent 7 years making herself smaller to fit into someone else's life. But underneath, Elena Vetrova was waking up, and she was furious. By the time the car arrived, a black armored sedan with tinted windows and diplomatic plates, the rain had turned vicious, the kind of downpour that flooded storm drains and turned streets into rivers. Elena walked out of the house without locking the door, without looking back, carrying nothing but the encrypted phone and the passport that bore her real name. The driver was a man built like a wall, ex-military, the kind who'd seen things that didn't make it into official reports. He opened the rear door without a word. Elena slid inside. The interior smelled like leather and gunpowder, faint but unmistakable. There was a bottle of vodka waiting in the console, Russian, expensive, and a crystal glass sitting beside it. She poured 2 fingers and drank it neat, feeling the burn slide down her throat, sharp and clarifying. "Where are we going?" she asked. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Manhattan. Mr. Vetrov is waiting at the penthouse." Elena leaned back against the seat, watching the New Jersey suburbs blur past the window. Houses with warm lights and ordinary lives. People who'd never know the weight of the world she was about to re-enter. Roman Vetrov. Her husband. Not ex-husband, because despite 7 years of silence, despite the life she'd tried to build as someone else, the papers had never been signed. She'd run, and he'd let her go, and somewhere in the space between those 2 decisions, a truth had survived. She'd never been free. She'd only been waiting. The car merged onto the highway, rain hammering the windshield, wipers moving in a hypnotic rhythm. Elena closed her eyes and let the memories come. The ones she'd buried. The ones that hurt too much to carry as Alara Quinn. She'd met Roman when she was 23, working as a cocktail waitress in a private club in Brooklyn, the kind of place where powerful men made deals that never appeared in newspapers. He'd walked in with an entourage, dressed in a suit that cost more than her annual salary, his presence commanding the room without effort. And he'd looked at her, really looked, not the way men usually did, with hunger or dismissal, but with recognition, as if he'd been searching for her his entire life, and finally found what he didn't know he was missing. Within a month, they were married. Within a year, she was drowning. Roman Vetrov wasn't cruel. He was something worse, inevitable. He controlled shipping routes and real estate, brokered deals between politicians and criminals, operated in the gray spaces where law became suggestion and power became currency. People feared him because he never raised his voice, never made threats, never needed to. When Roman wanted something, it happened. When he wanted someone gone, they vanished. And Elena had been his queen, draped in diamonds and danger, attending galas where billionaires whispered secrets and ambassadors traded favors. She'd learned to smile through negotiations that decided fates, to sit beside Roman while he quietly dismantled empires, to be beautiful and silent and utterly complicit, until she couldn't anymore. One night, after watching Roman destroy a man's career with a single phone call, a man whose only crime was refusing to sell property Roman wanted, Elena had realized she was disappearing, not physically, but fundamentally. Every day beside Roman, she became less herself, more decoration, another asset in his collection. So she'd run. She'd emptied a bank account he'd never miss, taken a fake ID, and vanished into suburban New Jersey, becoming a Lara Quinn, a woman with no past and no future, just an endless present of quiet desperation. She'd met Marcus at a bar, seen in him a kind of earnest ambition that felt safe, and convinced herself she could build something real with someone ordinary. She'd been wrong. Marcus wasn't ordinary. He was just a different kind of dangerous, the kind that destroyed through neglect instead of intention, that crushed dreams not with violence, but with indifference. And now, driving back toward the life she'd fled, Elena understood the bitter truth. She'd traded one cage for another. At least with Roman, the bars were gilded. The car exited the highway, entering Manhattan through the Lincoln Tunnel, the city rising up around them like a fortress of steel and light. Even through the rain, Elena could feel it, the pulse of New York, the relentless energy that never stopped, never slept, never forgave weakness. They drove through Midtown, past theaters and restaurants where crowds huddled under awnings, then into the quieter streets of the Upper East Side where old money lived behind doormen and security cameras. Finally, the car pulled up to a building Elena recognized immediately. The Meridian Tower. 60 stories of black glass and steel, the kind of architecture that looked like a knife stabbing into the sky. The top 5 floors belonged to Roman, penthouse suites with panoramic views, private elevators, and security that could stop a small army. The driver opened her door. Elena stepped out into the rain, letting it soak through the dress, feeling the cold bite of reality replacing the numb comfort of lies. Inside, the lobby was marble and silence, the kind of space where even footsteps sounded like intrusions. The doorman recognized her immediately, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to something like fear. "Mrs. Vetrova," he said, his voice strained. "Welcome home." She didn't correct him. The private elevator required a key card and a retinal scan. Elena provided both, watching the security panel flash green, then red, then green again as it verified her identity against databases that didn't officially exist. The elevator ascended in silence, the numbers climbing past floors occupied by diplomats and hedge fund managers, past penthouses owned by people whose names appeared in Forbes and never in handcuffs. When the doors opened, she was home. The penthouse was exactly as she remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that cost more than houses, art that belonged in museums hanging on walls like casual decoration. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the storm, was Roman Vetrov. He didn't turn around. 7 years, he said, his voice carrying across the room like a verdict. 7 years. And you never called. Never wrote. Never even sent a message to let me know you were alive. You knew I was alive, Elena said quietly. You've always known. Now he turned. Roman Vetrov at 45 was a man who'd aged into his power, the kind of face that suggested experience and danger in equal measure. His hair was steel gray at the temples, his jaw sharp, his eyes the color of frozen lakes. He wore black, always black, the fabric expensive enough to whisper wealth without screaming it. And he was smiling, not a warm smile, not the kind that reached his eyes, but a smile that said he'd been waiting for this moment, savoring it, and now that it had finally arrived, he intended to enjoy every second. "Of course I knew," Roman said. "I had people watching you from the day you left, making sure you were safe, making sure no one bothered you, making sure that when you were ready to come home." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle between them. "Nothing would stand in your way." Elena's chest tightened. "You've been watching me this whole time? Did you think I'd just let you go?" Roman crossed the room slowly, his footsteps deliberate. "You're my wife, Elena. That doesn't end because you run away. That doesn't end because you get scared. That doesn't end because you decide to play house with some small-time lawyer who doesn't know what he has." "Had," Elena corrected, her voice bitter. "He threw me away tonight." Roman stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke, expensive and unmistakable. His eyes searched her face, looking for something, finding it. "Good," he said softly. "Then he saved me the trouble of killing him." "Roman, I'm not joking." His voice dropped lower, colder. "He hurt you. He made you believe you were ordinary. He took the woman I love and convinced her she was worthless." Roman reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "For that alone, I could bury him so deep his own mother wouldn't find the grave." Elena pulled back. "I don't want him dead. I want him destroyed." "There's a difference?" "Yes." Her voice was steady now, the shock wearing off, replaced by something sharper. "I want Marcus Hale to understand what he did. I want him to lose everything, his career, his reputation, his perfect new life with Victoria Ashbourne. I want him to watch it all crumble and know it's because he was too stupid to see what he had." Roman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've thought about this." "Every minute of the drive here." "And if he fights back?" "He won't." Elena's smile was cold. "Because he doesn't know who I am. He never did. He married Elara Quinn, a nobody from nowhere. He has no idea Elena Vetrova even exists. Then we have an advantage. We have more than that." Elena walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once been hers, at the light spreading like veins through the darkness. Marcus built his entire career on one thing: access. Access to the Ashbournes, access to their money, access to the world they control. Take that away, and he's nothing. "And how do you plan to do that?" Elena turned back to face Roman, and for the first time since entering the penthouse, she felt something other than anger or fear or exhaustion. She felt powerful. "You're going to buy the Ashbournes," she said simply. Roman raised an eyebrow. "Buy them?" "Their company, their assets. Whatever it takes to gain controlling interest in Ashbourne Holdings. And when you do, Marcus becomes irrelevant. Victoria's family will drop him the second they realize he's connected to you." Elena crossed her arms. "Can you do it?" Roman's smile returned, wider this time, almost genuine. "Elena, I could have done it 7 years ago. The only reason I haven't is because I didn't care about the Ashbournes." He moved closer again, his presence filling the space between them. "But if you want them destroyed, consider it done." "How long will it take?" "A week, maybe less." "And Marcus won't see it coming?" "No one will." Roman reached into his jacket, pulled out a phone, and made a single call. "Start the acquisition, Ashbourne Holdings. I want controlling interest by Friday." He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Just like that, it was done. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but recognition. This was the world she'd left behind. This was the power she'd tried to forget. And standing here now, watching Roman dismantle lives with a phone call and no hesitation, she understood why she'd run, but she also understood why she'd come back. "What now?" she asked. Roman looked at her with an expression that was almost tender. "Now you remember who you are." "I never forgot." "Didn't you?" He stepped closer, his hand finding hers, his grip warm and firm. "For 7 years you played a part. You pretended to be someone small, someone safe, someone who didn't matter. You buried Elena Vetrova so deep you almost convinced yourself Elara Quinn was real." "She was real," Elena whispered. "She was a ghost." Roman's thumb brushed across her knuckles. And tonight, she died. Now it's time for the real you to come back. The woman who walked into this life without fear, who stood beside me through wars most people never see, who terrified half of New York just by existing. I'm not that woman anymore. Yes, you are. Roman lifted her hand, pressed it against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, steady and relentless. You're just remembering. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to pull away, wanted to insist that 7 years had changed her fundamentally. But standing there, feeling the weight of her real name settling back onto her shoulders, she couldn't deny the truth. Elara Quinn had been a fiction. Elena Vetrova had always been inevitable. What's the first step? She asked quietly. Roman released her hand, walked to the bar, and poured 2 glasses of vodka. He handed one to Elena, then raised his in a silent toast. Tomorrow morning you are attending a board meeting at Meridian Arts Initiative, he said. It's a dying nonprofit that runs after-school programs for kids in the Bronx. The board is corrupt, the funding is a disaster, and they're about to declare bankruptcy. Why would I go to that? Because I just bought it. Roman's smile turned sharp. And I'm making you the director. Elena stared at him. You bought a charity? I bought you a stage. Roman drank his vodka in one smooth motion. If you want to destroy Marcus, you can't just hide in my shadow. You need to be visible. You need the city to see Elena Vetrova, to remember her, to fear what she represents. And nothing makes powerful people pay attention faster than someone stepping in to fix what they've ignored. So this is strategy. This is war. Roman set down his glass. And in war, the first move is always positioning. Show New York you're back. Show them you're not hiding. Show them that the woman Marcus Hale threw away is worth more than he ever dreamed. Elena drank her vodka, the burn clarifying her thoughts, sharpening her focus. And Marcus? We'll hear about it by tomorrow afternoon, along with everyone else who matters. Roman moved toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Your room is ready, same as before. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding what you should never have left behind. He paused at the threshold, glancing back. And Elena. Yes? Welcome home. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone in the penthouse with her thoughts and the storm still raging beyond the windows. Elena stood there for a long time, the empty glass cold in her hand, the weight of 7 years pressing down like a physical thing. She thought about Marcus, probably celebrating with Victoria right now, convinced he'd traded up, convinced he'd finally broken free of the mediocre life holding him back. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Elena walked to the window, pressed her palm against the glass, felt the vibration of thunder rolling through the steel and stone. Below, Manhattan pulsed with life. Millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, dreams and disasters playing out in apartments and penthouses and back alleys where no one was watching. Somewhere out there, Marcus Hale was sleeping soundly, confident in his choices, secure in his future. By next week, that future would be ashes, and Elena Vetrova would be standing in the flames, watching it burn. She smiled, not with joy, not with cruelty, but with the cold certainty of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. The quiet housewife was dead. The queen had returned, and Manhattan was about to remember why some women should never be underestimated. Elena woke to the sound of a city that never learned to sleep. Car horns, sirens, the distant hum of garbage trucks grinding through their pre-dawn routes. She opened her eyes to a ceiling she hadn't seen in 7 years. Coffered panels, crown molding, a chandelier that cost more than most people earned in a year. For a moment, she forgot where she was. For a moment, she was still Elara Quinn, waking up in a modest bedroom in New Jersey, preparing to make coffee for a husband who'd already stopped caring. Then reality crashed back. Marcus, the divorce papers, the rain, Roman. She was home. The realization didn't bring comfort. It brought a sharp, hollow ache that settled somewhere between her ribs and refused to move. Elena sat up, the silk sheets cool against her skin. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out like a circuit board, lights still blazing even as dawn bled pink and gray across the horizon. She checked the clock on the nightstand, 5:47 a.m. Too early to be awake. Too late to go back to sleep. She showered in a bathroom larger than the entire kitchen she'd left behind, standing under water hot enough to scald, trying to wash away the last traces of Elara Quinn. But some stains went deeper than skin. Some marks didn't fade just because you changed your name. By the time she emerged, dressed in a black suit Roman's people had left hanging in the closet, tailored, expensive, the kind that announced power without apology, there was coffee waiting in the kitchen, not the cheap drip-brewed kind Marcus used to complain wasn't strong enough. Real coffee, Turkish, thick and bitter, served in a small cup that demanded attention. Roman was already there, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Russian. He glanced at Elena, held up one finger. Wait. And continued the conversation. She caught fragments. Numbers. Names she didn't recognize. The word immediately repeated 3 times, each iteration colder than the last. He ended the call, pocketed the phone, and turned to face her fully. Sleep well? No. Good. Roman moved to the kitchen island where a folder sat waiting. He pushed it toward her. Meridian Arts Initiative. Everything you need to know before the board meeting at 9. Elena picked up the folder but didn't open it. You really bought a charity overnight? I bought the building it operates from and the debt it owes. The charity came with the package. Roman poured himself coffee, drank it without sugar or cream, his expression unreadable. The previous director embezzled half the donations. The board consists of socialites who show up twice a year for photo opportunities. The kids they're supposed to be helping haven't seen a functioning program in 18 months. So it's a disaster. It's an opportunity. Roman set down his cup. Fix it. Make it matter. Show New York that Elena Vetrova doesn't just destroy, she builds. And when people start paying attention, when they start asking questions about who you are and where you came from, Marcus will hear about it. And then? Then he'll start connecting dots. He'll realize the woman he threw away wasn't ordinary. He'll understand what he lost. Roman's smile was sharp enough to cut. And by the time he figures it out, it'll be too late to do anything about it. Elena opened the folder. Financial statements, donor lists, staff records. The numbers were worse than Roman had described. Meridian Arts Initiative was bleeding money, drowning in debt, held together by grant funding that would dry up within 3 months. Saving it would require more than good intentions. It would require a miracle, or a woman who knew how to move money through channels that didn't appear on official ledgers. When do you tell them I'm taking over? Elena asked. I already did. They're expecting you at 9. Roman checked his watch. You have 2 hours. I suggest you use them to prepare. And you? I have other business. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through messages. The Ashbourne acquisition is moving faster than expected. Richard Ashbourne is stubborn, but he's also smart enough to recognize when he's losing ground. By Friday, I'll control enough of his company to make Victoria's engagement to Marcus a liability instead of an asset. Elena felt something twist in her chest. Not quite satisfaction, not quite guilt. Something in between, sharp and uncomfortable. What if Marcus fights back? She asked quietly. Roman looked up from his phone, his eyes cold. With what? He's a lawyer at a firm that depends on clients I can buy out tomorrow. He's engaged to a woman whose father will turn on him the second it becomes profitable. He has no leverage, Elena. He has nothing except the illusion of success. He paused. And illusions break easily. He left without saying goodbye. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the folder in her hands, feeling the weight of what she was about to do settle onto her shoulders like a coat made of stones. This wasn't just revenge. This was rebuilding herself in front of an audience that had already decided she didn't matter. She finished her coffee, grabbed the folder, and headed for the door. The Meridian Arts Initiative operated out of a converted warehouse in the Bronx, the kind of neighborhood where gentrification hadn't quite arrived yet and probably never would. The building was old brick, tagged with graffiti that ranged from crude to surprisingly artistic, surrounded by chain-link fencing that did nothing to keep anyone out. Elena arrived in the same black sedan that had picked her up the night before, driven by the same silent man who looked like he'd killed people for less than bad directions. The car pulled up to the curb, and she stepped out into morning air that smelled like exhaust and frying food from a bodega across the street. Inside, the building was worse than the outside suggested. Fluorescent lights flickered in hallways with peeling paint. The air smelled like mildew and desperation. A receptionist sat behind a desk stacked with unopened mail, her expression shifting from boredom to confusion when Elena walked in. Can I help you? The woman asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather not. Board meeting, Elena said. I'm the new director. The confusion deepened. We already have a director. Not anymore. Elena walked past the desk without waiting for permission, following the sound of voices coming from a room at the end of the hallway. She pushed open the door without knocking. Inside, 6 people sat around a conference table scarred with coffee rings and carved initials. They stopped mid-conversation when Elena entered, their faces registering varying degrees of surprise and irritation. At the head of the table sat a man in his 60s, gray-haired and soft around the middle, wearing a blazer that had been expensive once but now looked tired. Gerald Pittman, according to the folder. Former board president, current figurehead, and the primary reason donations had been disappearing into offshore accounts. Who the hell are you? Gerald demanded. Elena Vetrova. She didn't sit. As of this morning, I own this building, the organization's debt, and everything else that keeps Meridian from collapsing, which means I own you. Silence. Gerald recovered first, his face reddening. You can't just walk in here and... I already did. Elena dropped the folder onto the table. It landed with a thud that made 2 of the board members flinch. I've reviewed the financials. Over the past 3 years, approximately $2 million in donations have disappeared. The programs you're supposed to be funding don't exist. The kids you claim to help haven't seen a functioning class in over a year. And every single person in this room signed off on reports claiming everything was fine. Now wait just a minute. I'm not finished. Elena's voice didn't rise, but it cut through Gerald's protest like a blade. You have 2 options. Option 1, resign immediately, quietly, and hope I don't forward the evidence of embezzlement to the district attorney. Option 2, refuse, and I'll make sure your names are attached to every news story about fraud and corruption that runs for the next 6 months. Another board member, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled hair and jewelry that screamed old money, leaned forward. You're bluffing. Am I? Elena pulled out her phone, opened an email, and turned the screen toward the table. I have copies of every falsified report, every forged signature, every wire transfer to accounts in the Caymans. I also have a prosecutor on speed dial who's very interested in white-collar crime. She smiled, cold and humorless. So no, Mrs. Hartwell, I'm not bluffing. I'm giving you an exit that doesn't end with handcuffs. Gerald stood, his chair scraping against the floor. This is extortion. This is justice. Elena pocketed her phone. You have until noon to submit your resignations. After that, I start making calls. She turned and walked out, leaving the folder on the table, leaving the board members staring after her in stunned silence. In the hallway, Elena's hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from rage, from the intoxicating rush of using power the way Roman had taught her, decisively, brutally, without apology. This was who she'd been before Marcus. This was who she was becoming again, and it felt like taking off a blindfold after 7 years of stumbling in the dark. By noon, all 6 board members had resigned. By 2 p.m., Elena had hired a forensic accountant to track down the missing money. By 4 p.m., she'd called an emergency staff meeting with the 3 remaining employees who hadn't quit when the paychecks stopped coming. They gathered in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. 2 teachers and a program coordinator, all of them young, all of them exhausted in the way that comes from caring too much about a job that doesn't care back. Elena stood at the front of the room, studying the faces in front of her. They looked wary, suspicious, like they'd heard too many promises from people who disappeared the moment things got hard. My name is Elena Vetrova, she began. As of this morning, I own Meridian. I'm going to save it, but I need to know if you're willing to help. The oldest of the 3, a woman in her late 20s with dark circles under her eyes and paint stains on her jeans, spoke first. We've heard that before. I'm sure you have. Elena didn't sugarcoat it. You've been lied to, stolen from, and abandoned by people who use this organization as a tax write-off and a networking opportunity. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here to make this work. Why? The question came from a younger man, early 20s, with the kind of idealism that hadn't quite been beaten out of him yet. Why do you care? Elena paused. The honest answer was complicated. Revenge, strategy, Roman's calculated plan to make her visible. But standing there, looking at three people who'd kept showing up even when they weren't getting paid, she found a different truth rising to the surface. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible," she said quietly. "I know what it's like to be told you don't matter, that you're not worth the effort, that you should just accept being ordinary." She met each of their eyes in turn. "And I know what it's like to prove everyone wrong." Something shifted in the room. The woman with paint-stained jeans straightened slightly. "What do you need from us?" "Everything." Elena pulled out a notepad. "I need a full list of every kid who was enrolled before the programs collapsed. I need to know what worked, what didn't, and what you'd do differently if you had unlimited funding. I need honesty, not optimism. Can you do that?" They could. For the next 3 hours, they talked. Not about budgets or board politics, but about kids, 12-year-olds who needed art supplies and a safe place to go after school, teenagers who wanted to learn music but couldn't afford instruments, children who'd never left the Bronx and dreamed of visiting museums in Manhattan. By the time the meeting ended, Elena had pages of notes and a plan that would require more money than Meridian had seen in 5 years. She called Roman. He answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" "I need $2 million. "Done." "Roman." "Elena, I told you, whatever you need to make this work, you have it." His voice was firm. "Send me the account information. The money will be there by morning." She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of owing something to a man who never forgot debts. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me." Roman's tone softened, just slightly. "Make it matter." He hung up. Elena stood alone in the empty break room, staring at the notes in her hands, wondering when helping others had become another form of warfare. Across town, Marcus Hale was having the best week of his life. He'd moved into Victoria's penthouse in Tribeca, 3,000 square feet of designer furniture and skyline views, the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines and made other lawyers weep with envy. Victoria's father had invited him to play golf at a private club in Westchester. The senior partners at Whitmore and Vail had started including him in meetings that actually mattered. Everything was falling into place. On Wednesday afternoon, Marcus sat in his corner office, recently upgraded after the Ashbourne engagement became official, reviewing contracts when his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Lunch at Cipriani. 1 hour. Bring your appetite." He smiled. Life was good. Cipriani was packed with the kind of people who measured success in square footage and vacation homes. Marcus walked in wearing his best suit, the Tom Ford he'd bought specifically for occasions like this, and found Victoria already seated at a table near the windows. She looked stunning. She always did. Blonde hair perfectly styled, jewelry that cost more than his law school tuition, the kind of effortless elegance that came from never worrying about money. "You're late," she said, but she was smiling. "Traffic." Marcus leaned down to kiss her cheek, catching a whiff of perfume that probably cost $500 an ounce. "You look beautiful." "I know." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. We need to talk." Something in her tone made Marcus's stomach tighten, but he sat, ordering a Manhattan when the waiter appeared because that's what men who'd made it were supposed to drink. Victoria waited until the waiter left before speaking. "My father had an interesting conversation this morning." "Oh?" "With his CFO. Apparently someone's been buying up shares in Ashbourne Holdings. Quietly. Through shell companies and offshore accounts." She leaned forward slightly. "Any idea who would do that?" Marcus felt the first trickle of unease. "Could be anyone. Hedge funds, private equity." "It's not anyone." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's Roman Vetrov." The name hit Marcus like a fist. "Who?" "Don't play stupid, Marcus. It's not attractive." Victoria picked up her wine glass, swirled it once. "Roman Vetrov, Russian, extremely wealthy, extremely connected, controls shipping, real estate, half the underground economy in New York." She took a sip. "And according to my father's people, he's been systematically acquiring controlling interest in our company for the past 72 hours. Marcus's mouth went dry. "Why would he do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out." Victoria set down her glass. "My father thinks it's a hostile takeover, but Roman Vetrov doesn't need our company. He has his own empire. So either this is about leverage." She paused, watching Marcus's face carefully. Or it's personal. Personal how? That's what you're going to find out. Victoria pulled out her phone, opened a photo, and slid it across the table. Recognize her? Marcus looked at the screen, and his world tilted sideways. The photo showed a woman standing outside a building in the Bronx, dressed in a black suit, her posture confident, her face turned slightly toward the camera. It had been taken yesterday, according to the timestamp. The woman was Ilara. Except it wasn't. Same face, same eyes. But everything else was different. The way she stood, the way she carried herself, the expression that suggested power instead of uncertainty. Who is she? Marcus heard himself ask, his voice sounding distant. That's what I want to know. Victoria reclaimed her phone. She showed up at some charity in the Bronx 2 days ago, fired the entire board, and started throwing money around like it was nothing. The building is owned by one of Roman Vetrov's holding companies, and according to the staff, her name is Elena Vetrova. The room was spinning. Vetrov. That's my wife, Marcus stammered. Victoria's expression went very still. Your ex-wife. We just signed the papers last week. Marcus. Victoria's voice dropped, cold and sharp. Are you telling me you were married to Roman Vetrov's wife? I didn't know. I mean, she never... Marcus's thoughts were racing, fragments colliding. Her name was Ilara Quinn. She was a housewife. She didn't have money. She didn't have connections. She was nobody. Clearly, she was somebody. Victoria stood, her movements precise and controlled. And you didn't know. Which means either you're an idiot or she played you for 7 years. Victoria, wait. My father is meeting with Roman Vetrov tomorrow morning. She picked up her purse, her face unreadable. If this acquisition goes through, if Roman takes control of Ashbourne Holdings, do you know what that means for you? Marcus couldn't speak. It means you're a liability. Victoria leaned down, her voice barely above a whisper. It means you brought Russian Mafia ties into my family through a marriage you didn't even understand. It means every deal you touch is now suspect. Every client you bring in is a risk. I didn't know, Marcus repeated, hating how weak he sounded. That's the problem. Victoria straightened. Figure out what's happening. Figure out why Roman Vetrov cares about you enough to destabilize my family's company. And figure it out fast, because if you can't... She paused at the threshold. We're done. She walked out. Marcus sat alone at the table, staring at his untouched Manhattan, feeling the foundation of his new life crack and splinter beneath him. Ilara Quinn didn't exist. She never had. And whoever Elena Vetrova was, she'd just declared war. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He got drunk. Not the polished, controlled drinking that happened at firm events and client dinners. Real drunk. The kind that erased thoughts and drowned questions and turned the world into a merciful blur. He sat in a bar in Midtown, the kind of place where nobody knew his name and nobody cared, throwing back whiskey until the bartender started giving him looks that suggested he should slow down. He didn't slow down. Everything he'd built, the partnership track, the engagement, the penthouse, the life he'd convinced himself he deserved, all of it was collapsing. And the worst part, the part that made him want to punch through walls, was that he had no idea why. 7 years married to a woman he thought he knew, and it had all been a lie. Who was she? What had she been doing? And why? Why had Roman Vetrov, a man whose name made billionaires nervous, targeted him specifically? Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he'd deleted 6 months ago. His college roommate, Jamie, who'd gone into private investigation instead of law, who owed Marcus a favor from a case they'd worked together years back. He hit dial. Jamie answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy. Do you know what time it is? I need you to find someone, Marcus said, his words slurring slightly. Marcus, I need you to find out everything about a woman named Elena Vetrova. Who she is, where she came from, what she's been doing for the past 7 years. Marcus downed the rest of his drink, signaling for another. And I need it yesterday. Elena Vetrova? Jamie's voice sharpened. As in, married to Roman Vetrov? Yes. A long pause. Marcus, are you insane? You don't investigate people connected to Roman Vetrov unless you have a death wish. She was my wife, Marcus said through clenched teeth. What? For 7 years, except she called herself Alara Quinn, and I never knew. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. I divorced her last week, and now everything's falling apart. Another pause, longer this time. Jesus, Marcus, what did you do? I made a mistake. Marcus stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Bloodshot eyes, loosened tie, the face of a man who'd just realized he'd been playing a game without knowing the rules. I need to fix it. You can't fix this, Jamie said quietly. If Roman Vetrov is involved, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Then help me understand why, Jamie sighed. I'll see what I can find. But Marcus, whatever you discover, it's not going to make this better. It's only going to show you how badly you fucked up. I already know that. No, Jamie said. You really don't. He hung up. Marcus ordered another drink, then another, until the bartender finally cut him off and called him a cab. He rode back to the penthouse in silence, watching Manhattan blur past the windows, wondering when his life had become unrecognizable. When he stumbled through the front door, Victoria was waiting. She stood in the living room, still dressed despite the late hour, her arms crossed, her expression cold enough to freeze blood. Where were you? She demanded. Thinking. You smell like a distillery. I'm aware. Marcus dropped his keys on the console table, steadied himself against the wall. Did your father meet with Vetrov? Not yet. Tomorrow morning. Victoria watched him like he was something distasteful. But I already know how it's going to end. How? With you gone. She said it simply, without malice, just stating a fact. My father won't risk the family name for a lawyer who brought Russian Mafia connections into our business. You're done at Whitmore and Vale. You're done in this city. And you're sure as hell done with me. Marcus felt the last thread holding him together snap. So that's it? His voice rose, anger flooding through the alcohol. One complication, one connection you didn't know about, and you're just going to throw me away? Don't you dare! Victoria's voice turned to ice. I am not the one who lied for 7 years. I am not the one who married a woman connected to organized crime without bothering to find out who she was. You did this, Marcus, not me. I loved you. No. Victoria shook her head. You loved what I represented. The money, the status, the access. You loved the idea of escaping your mediocre life. She moved closer, her eyes hard. But you never loved me. And I sure as hell never loved you. The words landed like physical blows. Get out, Victoria said quietly. Pack your things and get out. I want you gone by morning. Victoria. Now, Marcus. He didn't have the strength to fight. Marcus went to the bedroom, threw clothes into a suitcase with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, grabbed his laptop and his files and everything that proved he'd once belonged here. When he emerged 30 minutes later, Victoria was gone. He left the keys on the counter and walked out into the night, dragging his suitcase behind him, with nowhere to go and no one to call. For the first time in his carefully planned life, Marcus Hale was completely, utterly alone. And somewhere across the city, Elena Vetrova was awake, staring at her phone, reading the update Roman had sent an hour ago. Ashbourne deal closing tomorrow. Marcus is finished. How does it feel? She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on the truth. Empty. Because watching Marcus fall apart wasn't bringing her peace. It was only showing her how much of herself she'd buried to be with him in the first place. And now, standing in a penthouse that had never really been home, surrounded by wealth that felt more like chains than freedom, Elena understood something devastating. She'd spent 7 years hiding from Roman's world, but she'd spent 7 years disappearing into Marcus's indifference, and neither man had ever actually seen her. She threw the phone across the room, heard it crack against the wall, and finally let herself cry. Not for Marcus, not for the marriage that had died, but for the woman she'd almost become. Ordinary, forgettable, erased, never again. Tomorrow, Manhattan's elite would gather at the Garrison Grand Hotel for the annual charity gala. Tomorrow, Elena Vetrova would walk into that ballroom beside Roman, wearing power like a second skin. Tomorrow, Marcus would finally understand what he'd thrown away, and there would be no coming back from that moment. No forgiveness, no second chances, just the cold, brutal truth of consequences. Elena wiped her eyes, walked to the closet, and pulled out the midnight blue dress Roman had bought for the event. Silk that moved like water, a cut that demanded attention without begging for it. She held it against her body, studying her reflection in the mirror. Alara Quinn would never have worn this dress, but Elena Vetrova had been born for it. And tomorrow night, the Queen was coming home. The Garrison Grand Hotel rose above Fifth Avenue like a monument to everything money could buy, and most people would never touch. Built in 1923 by a railroad baron who'd wanted to prove he belonged among the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts, the building was all marble columns and gold leaf, crystal chandeliers that weighed more than cars, and a guest list that read like a Forbes directory crossed with a political donor roll. Tonight, Manhattan's elite had gathered for the annual Children's Future Gala, an event where billionaires wrote six-figure checks, congratulated themselves for caring, and went home feeling like heroes. The ballroom glittered with diamonds and champagne, tuxedos and gowns, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Marcus arrived alone. He'd spent the past 3 days in a hotel room in Chelsea, the kind of place with thin walls and a view of a brick wall, burning through his savings while his phone filled with messages from the firm. They were polite messages, professional, but the subtext was clear. Don't come back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Victoria hadn't answered a single call. Her father's assistant had sent a terse email. Mr. Ashbourne requests you do not attempt further contact with the family. And this morning, Jamie had finally sent the report Marcus had been dreading. Elena Vetrova, born Elena Kozlov in Brighton Beach, married Roman Vetrov at 23 after working in one of his clubs, disappeared 7 years ago under circumstances that remained unclear. Some reports suggested she'd fled, others that Roman had hidden her for protection. Either way, she'd vanished completely until 4 days ago when she'd walked back into Roman's penthouse like she'd never left. There were photos attached to the report. Elena beside Roman at a fundraiser in Moscow. Elena at a private auction in London. Elena standing on the deck of a yacht off the coast of Monaco, wearing sunglasses and a smile that suggested she owned the ocean. Marcus had stared at those photos for hours, trying to reconcile them with the woman who'd cooked his dinners and asked about his day and apologized when the laundry wasn't folded right. They were the same person. But they weren't. He'd made himself come to the gala because hiding felt like surrender. Because some self-destructive part of him needed to see her, needed to understand what he'd actually thrown away. Because maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to fix this. He was wrong. Marcus stood near this bar, nursing a scotch he couldn't afford, watching the crowd circulate like sharks in formal wear. He recognized faces, senior partners from rival firms, hedge fund managers, politicians who claimed to work for the people while drinking $1,000 wine. And then, near the entrance, a ripple moved through the room. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. The air itself seemed to shift, tension replacing the comfortable buzz of the wealthy congratulating themselves. The doors opened. Roman Vetrov entered first, moving through the crowd with the kind of presence that made people step aside without thinking about it. He wore black, perfectly tailored, his expression neutral but his eyes cataloging every face, every reaction, every potential threat in the room. And beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, was Elena. Marcus's breath stopped. She wore midnight blue silk that moved like water, the dress cut to suggest elegance without desperation, power without apology. Her dark hair was pulled back, exposing the kind of bone structure that belonged in oil paintings. Diamonds, real ones, the kind that caught light and held it, glittered at her throat and ears. But it wasn't the dress or the jewelry that commanded attention. It was her. The way she moved, the way she held herself, the absolute certainty in every step that she belonged here, that she'd always belonged here, and anyone who thought otherwise was simply mistaken. This wasn't Alara Quinn. This wasn't even the woman from the photos Jamie had sent. This was someone Marcus had never met, someone he'd lived with for 7 years without ever actually seeing. Elena's eyes swept the room, cool and assessing, until they landed on him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled, not warm, not cruel, just a slight curve of her lips that acknowledged his existence the way you'd acknowledge furniture, and turned her attention elsewhere. It was the dismissal that destroyed him. Not anger, not confrontation, just complete, absolute indifference, as if he were so far beneath notice that acknowledging him further would be a waste of energy. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. He watched Elena move through the crowd, watched people gravitate toward her and Roman like planets pulled by gravity, watched her laugh at something an elderly woman said, watched her shake hands with a senator, watched her become the center of the room without trying. And then Victoria appeared. She materialized at Elena's elbow, her expression carefully neutral, her posture perfect. Marcus was too far away to hear what they said, but he saw Victoria's face go pale, saw her spine stiffen, saw the exact moment she realized whatever Elena was telling her had just rewritten everything Victoria thought she knew. Marcus pushed through the crowd, not caring who he shoved aside, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached them just as Elena finished speaking. Still legally married, Elena was saying, her voice pleasant and conversational, as if discussing the weather. The divorce wasn't finalized, which makes your engagement somewhat complicated, doesn't it? Victoria's eyes found Marcus across the 3 feet separating them. Her expression could have frozen oceans. "Is this true?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I have the documents if you'd like to see them," Elena continued, pulling a folded paper from the small clutch she carried. "Filed but never processed. A technicality, really, but in legal terms—" She glanced at Marcus, and this time there was something sharp in her eyes. "We're still husband and wife." The bottom fell out of Marcus's world. "That's impossible," he managed. "I filed the papers. I did everything—" "You filed them," Elena agreed, "to a processing office that Roman owns. They've been sitting in a drawer for the past week." She handed the papers to Victoria, who took them with trembling fingers. "I'm sure it was an honest mistake. Bureaucracy can be so complicated." Victoria stared at the documents, her face draining of color. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy with rage and humiliation. "You son of a bitch," she said to Marcus, her voice shaking. "You proposed to me while you were still married? You brought me into your mess, made my family vulnerable to—" She gestured at Elena and Roman. "To this?" "I didn't know," Marcus said desperately. "I thought—" "You didn't think—" Victoria's voice rose, drawing attention from the surrounding crowd. "You didn't bother to check. You were so eager to trade up, so desperate to escape your pathetic little life, that you didn't care who you destroyed in the process." She threw the papers at his chest. They fluttered to the floor like accusations. "We're done," Victoria said. "My father's lawyers will be contacting you about the Ashbourne acquisition. Apparently, Roman Vatrov now controls 43% of our company. And according to our attorneys, that happened because you—" She jabbed a finger at his chest. "Connected our family to someone we never should have been near." "That's not fair, shit." "Fair?" Victoria laughed, high and brittle. "You want to talk about fair? You married a woman you didn't know, divorced her without understanding who she was, and somehow convinced yourself you were the victim in all this." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to something poisonous. "You're not a victim, Marcus. You're a fool. And I hope she destroys you." Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking against marble, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of a ballroom full of people who were now staring at him with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Elena watched Victoria go, then turned her attention back to Marcus. Roman had moved a few feet away, deep in conversation with Richard Ashbourne, but his posture suggested he was still tracking every word of Elena's conversation. "You shouldn't have come tonight," Elena said quietly. "I needed to see you," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "I needed to understand—" "Understand what?" Elena's tone was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "That I was never the person you thought I was? That you spent 7 years married to a ghost?" She tilted her head slightly. "Or did you come here hoping I'd forgive you?" "I came here because I made a mistake." "You made several." Elena's eyes were cold now, any softness evaporating. "But the biggest one was thinking I was ordinary, that I was lucky to have you, that I should be grateful for scraps of your attention while you built a life that had no room for me in it." "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "You meant every word, Marcus. Every dismissal, every casual cruelty, every moment you made me feel invisible. You meant all of it. And the only reason you regret it now is because you finally understand what you lost. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. I loved you. No. Elena shook her head. You loved the idea of me. The quiet wife who made your life easier. The woman who asked for nothing and demanded less. But you never loved me because you never knew me. She paused. And now you never will. She turned to walk away. Marcus grabbed her arm without thinking. The effect was instantaneous. Roman's head snapped up from across the room. Two men in dark suits materialized from the crowd, moving toward Marcus with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested military training, and Elena went very, very still. Let go, she said softly. Marcus released her immediately, suddenly aware of how many people were watching, how many phones might be recording, how catastrophically stupid he'd just been. I'm sorry, he stammered. I need you to know I'm sorry. Elena looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I know you are, she said finally. But sorry doesn't undo 7 years. Sorry doesn't give me back the person I was before I tried to become small enough for you to love. Sorry is just a word you say when you finally realize consequences exist. She walked away. This time Marcus didn't try to stop her. He stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, feeling hundreds of eyes on him, hearing whispers spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Someone laughed. He couldn't see who, but the sound cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Marcus fled. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the voices calling after him, and made it to the balcony before his legs gave out. He collapsed against the railing, gasping for air, feeling the world spin around him. Everything was gone. Victoria. The firm. His reputation. His future. All of it destroyed in less than a week. And for what? Because he'd wanted more? Because he'd believed he deserved better? Because he'd convinced himself Alara Quinn was holding him back from the life he was meant to have? Marcus laughed, the sound broken and bitter. He'd been right about one thing. Alara Quinn had been holding him back, but not from success, from catastrophe. Behind him, the balcony door opened. Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't have the energy. You look like hell, a voice said. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. Jamie stood there, hands in his pockets, expression grim. What are you doing here? Marcus asked. Following up, Jamie moved to stand beside him at the railing, looking out over the city. I've been digging deeper into Elena Vetrova since we last spoke. Found some things you're not going to like. I already don't like any of this. It gets worse. Jamie pulled out his phone, opened a photo, and handed it to Marcus. This was taken 6 years ago, Moscow. The photo showed Elena and Roman at what looked like a state dinner, surrounded by men in military uniforms and women dripping with jewels. Elena was laughing at something, her head thrown back, Roman's arm around her waist. So, Marcus said, so that dinner was attended by 3 current members of the Russian parliament, 2 oligarchs currently under international sanctions, and the deputy director of the FSB. Jamie took the phone back. Elena wasn't just married to a powerful man, Marcus. She was part of his operations. There are reports, unconfirmed but credible, that she helped broker deals, facilitated meetings, acted as a translator for negotiations that never appeared in any official records. Marcus's stomach turned. You're saying she was... I'm saying she knew exactly what she was doing. Jamie pocketed his phone. And when she disappeared 7 years ago, Roman didn't hunt her down. He let her go. Which means either she had leverage to keep him away, or he was waiting for her to come back on her own terms. Why are you telling me this? Jamie looked at him. Because you need to understand what you're up against. Roman Vetrov doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. And if Elena wants you destroyed, she has the resources to make it happen in ways that'll never trace back to her. She already destroyed me, Marcus said hollowly. There's nothing left. There's always something left. Jamie's voice was hard. Your law license, your freedom, your life. Don't assume you've hit bottom just because you lost a job and a fiancé. It can always get worse. Then what am I supposed to do? Disappear. Jamie said it simply. Leave New York, change your name if you have to, because staying here, trying to rebuild, fighting back, that's suicide. Elena Vetrova doesn't play games she can lose. And right now, you're not even a player. You're a warning to other people about what happens when you cross her. Marcus stared out at the city, at the light stretching to the horizon, at the life he'd thought he was building that had turned out to be nothing but sand. "I can't just run," he said. "Then you're a dead man walking." Jamie clapped him on the shoulder. "Good luck, Marcus. You're going to need it." He walked back inside, leaving Marcus alone on the balcony with the cold and the dark and the crushing weight of his own mistakes. Inside the ballroom, Elena stood beside Roman, accepting congratulations from people who'd ignored her existence 7 years ago and now couldn't wait to claim they'd always known she was special. The attention felt like drowning. Every smile was a lie. Every handshake was a transaction. Every conversation was a performance. She'd won. Marcus was broken. Victoria had abandoned him. The Ashbourne family would soon realize they had no choice but to work with Roman on his terms. Whitmore and Vale would quietly erase Marcus's name from the partnership track and pretend he'd never existed. Everything Elena had planned was coming to fruition. So why did she feel hollow? "You're not enjoying this," Roman said quietly, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "I'm fine." "You're lying." Roman's eyes swept the room, always watching, always calculating. "You got what you wanted. Marcus is destroyed. Your name is back in circulation. By tomorrow morning, everyone who matters will know Elena Vetrova has returned." He paused. "So why do you look like you're at a funeral?" "Because that's what it felt like. Not a celebration, a burial." Elena had spent the past week telling herself this was justice, that Marcus deserved to suffer the way she'd suffered, to feel invisible the way he'd made her feel, to understand loss on a fundamental level. She'd convinced herself that watching him break would somehow heal the parts of her he'd damaged. But standing here now, surrounded by wealth and power and people who didn't actually care about her beyond what she could do for them, Elena realized something devastating. This wasn't healing. This was becoming exactly what she'd run from 7 years ago. "I need air," she said. Roman caught her wrist. "Elena, please." She met his eyes, and whatever he saw there made him release her. Elena slipped through the crowd, ignoring the voices calling her name, and found a service hallway that led to a back stairwell. She climbed, her heels echoing in the concrete space, until she reached the roof access. The door was alarmed, but Elena didn't care. She pushed it open, setting off a distant siren that someone would silence in a minute or two, and stepped out into the night. The rooftop was empty, just gravel and HVAC units and a view that stretched across Manhattan like a galaxy of artificial stars. Elena walked to the edge, gripping the low wall, and let herself finally breathe. The problem, she realized, wasn't that the revenge felt wrong. The problem was that it felt right. She'd enjoyed watching Marcus squirm. She'd savored the look on Victoria's face when the truth came out. She'd felt a rush of power standing in that ballroom, knowing she could destroy people with a word, a gesture, a single carefully placed truth. And that terrified her. Because it meant Roman had been right all along. She'd never escaped his world. She'd only been hiding from herself. "I thought I'd find you up here," a voice said behind her. Elena spun around. Roman stood in the doorway, the alarm still blaring faintly in the background. He closed the door behind him, muffling the sound, and crossed the rooftop with slow, deliberate steps. "How did you know?" Elena asked. "Because this is where you always go when you're trying to decide who you are." Roman stopped a few feet away. "You did the same thing 7 years ago, the night before you left." Elena's breath caught. "You knew I was going to leave?" "I suspected." Roman's expression was unreadable. "You'd stopped looking at me. You'd started looking through me, like I was already a ghost. And I knew. I've always known that you stayed as long as you did out of fear, not love." The words hit like a physical blow. "That's not true," Elena said, but her voice wavered. "Isn't it?" Roman moved closer. "You loved the idea of me, the power, the protection, the life I could give you, but you were terrified of what it cost, what it was turning you into." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "And I let you go because I wanted you to choose this life, not be trapped in it." "Choose?" Elena's voice rose. "You've been watching me for 7 years, Roman. You knew where I was, who I was with, every move I made. That's not letting me go. That's keeping me on a leash I couldn't see. I was protecting you." "From what?" Elena pushed his hand away. "From living my own life, from making my own choices, from being someone other than your wife? From being ordinary. Roman's voice turned cold. You want to pretend those 7 years mattered? That your marriage to Marcus was real? It was a fantasy, Elena. You were hiding, and the moment he showed you who he really was, you came running back to exactly what you swore you'd never return to. I came back because I had nowhere else to go. You came back because this is where you belong. Roman's eyes were hard now, unyielding. You can't exist in his world because you're not made for it. You're made for this, the danger, the power, the consequences. You're made to stand beside me, not behind some lawyer who couldn't see past his own ambition. And if I don't want that? Elena's voice cracked. If I don't want to be Elena Vetrova or Alara Quinn, if I just want to be— What? Roman interrupted. Yourself? You don't even know who that is anymore. The truth of it knocked the air from her lungs. Roman was right. Elena had spent 7 years trying to be someone else, only to discover that the person she'd been before was just another mask. She didn't know who she was underneath all the identities, all the performances, all the desperate attempts to become someone anyone would care about. I can't do this, she whispered. Can't do what? This. Elena gestured between them. I can't be your wife. I can't be your weapon. I can't stand beside you and pretend I'm okay with how you destroy people because it's efficient. Then what do you want? The question hung in the air like a challenge. What did she want? Not revenge. That had proven empty the moment it succeeded. Not power. That felt like chains instead of freedom. Not Roman, because being with him meant losing herself completely. And not Marcus, because he'd never wanted the real her anyway. I want— Elena's voice broke. I want to matter. Not because of who I'm married to, not because of what I can do for someone else's empire, not because I'm useful or beautiful or dangerous. I just want to matter because I exist. Roman stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something Elena had never seen him do in all the years she'd known him. He stepped back. Then go, he said quietly. What? Go. Roman's voice was steady, but something in his eyes looked almost broken. I won't stop you this time. I won't watch you. I won't send people to protect you or track your movements or wait for you to come back. If you want to matter on your own terms, you need to actually be on your own. Elena felt tears burning hot down her cheeks. Roman? I love you, he said, and it was the first time she'd ever heard him say it without it sounding like ownership. I have loved you since the moment you walked into my club 7 years ago and looked at me like I was just another man instead of something to fear, but I can't make you stay. And I won't become another cage you need to escape. He pulled something from his pocket, a set of keys, and pressed them into her hand. There's an apartment in Brooklyn. Lease is paid for 5 years. Bank account in your name only. No connections to me. Passport, credit cards, everything you need to start over without anyone's help. Roman's jaw tightened, including mine. Elena looked down at the keys, feeling the weight of actual freedom settling into her palm like lead. This was what she'd wanted. So why did it feel like losing? What about Marcus? She managed to ask. What about him? Roman's expression hardened. He destroyed himself. I just gave him enough rope. If you want to keep punishing him, that's your choice. But it won't change anything. It won't make you whole. He was right. God help her, he was right about everything. Elena closed her fingers around the keys. Thank you, she whispered. Roman nodded once, then turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. For what it's worth, he said, his voice carrying across the rooftop. I always knew you were meant for something more than being my wife. I just hoped— He stopped, cleared his throat. I hoped I'd be enough to make you stay anyway. He walked through the door and disappeared. Elena stood alone on the roof, holding keys to a life she didn't recognize, watching the city breathe beneath her like a living thing. She'd come back to New York for revenge. She'd destroyed Marcus, reclaimed her name, proved she wasn't ordinary. And somehow, she'd ended up exactly where she started. Lost. Alone. And terrified that the person she'd been fighting so hard to become didn't actually exist. Below her, the gala continued. Above her, stars struggled to compete with city lights. And inside her chest, something that felt like hope and heartbreak in equal measure whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the first honest moment she'd had in 7 years. Not Elena Vetrova, not Alara Quinn, Just a woman standing on a rooftop, holding keys to a future she'd have to build entirely from scratch. Terrifying. Elena didn't go to the Brooklyn apartment that night. She couldn't. The keys burned in her palm like accusations, like promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Instead, she walked. Down the fire escape, through back alleys, into streets where the city showed its teeth, past midnight diners where exhausted workers grabbed coffee between shifts, past bodega corners where transactions happened in whispers, past subway grates exhaling steam like the city itself was breathing. Her feet carried her without destination, the midnight blue dress drawing stares she didn't acknowledge, until she found herself standing outside the warehouse in the Bronx. The Meridian Arts Initiative. The building was dark, locked, silent, but through the barred windows she could see shapes, tables stacked with art supplies, walls covered in half-finished murals, the skeleton of something that wanted to be real. She'd started this as strategy, as a way to make herself visible, to position herself for war. But somewhere in the past week, in meetings with teachers who stayed despite not being paid, in conversations with kids who needed safe spaces more than they needed promises, it had become something else. It had become the only thing that mattered. Elena pulled out her phone. It was 2:47 a.m. She called anyway. The program coordinator, Sarah, the woman with paint-stained jeans, answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello? It's Elena Vetrova." She heard rustling on the other end, the sound of someone sitting up fast. "I need you to meet me at Meridian tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Bring the other two teachers. Tomorrow's Saturday. I know what day it is." Elena's voice was harder than she intended. She softened it. "Please, this is important." A pause. Then, "We'll be there." Elena ended the call and stared at the dark building. Roman had given her an exit, a clean break from everything, his world, Marcus's destruction, the revenge that tasted like ash. But walking away meant abandoning the three people who'd believed her when she said she'd make Meridian matter. It meant leaving behind kids who'd already been abandoned too many times. It meant choosing freedom over responsibility. And Elena was tired of choosing the easy way out. She turned and walked back toward Manhattan, toward the penthouse she'd left behind, her mind already building plans that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with proving, to herself more than anyone, that she could build something instead of just burning things down. At 5:53 a.m., Elena stood outside the Meridian building wearing jeans and a sweater she'd stolen from Roman's closet years ago, holding 3 cups of coffee from a 24-hour diner. The sun was just starting to bleed orange across the Bronx, painting the graffiti-tagged walls in colors that almost looked intentional. Sarah arrived first, riding a bicycle with a milk crate zip-tied to the back. She looked at Elena, at the casual clothes, the coffee, the absence of security, and something in her expression shifted from wariness to cautious hope. "You're actually here," Sarah said. "I said I would be." The other two teachers arrived within minutes. Marcus, the young idealist whose name made Elena's chest tighten, and Jennifer, older, more skeptical, the kind of woman who'd learned not to trust pretty promises from rich people. Elena handed out the coffees and unlocked the building. Inside, she flipped on lights that flickered twice before catching, illuminating the disaster that was Meridian's current state. Broken chairs, water-stained ceiling tiles, donated art supplies still in boxes because there was nowhere to store them properly. "Here's the truth," Elena said, setting her coffee on a table. "I started this for the wrong reasons. I needed to be visible, to make a statement, to show New York I was back." She met each of their eyes in turn. "But I don't want to do this for those reasons anymore." "Then why?" Jennifer asked, her arms crossed. "Because you stayed." Elena's voice caught slightly. "Because when the board stopped caring and the money disappeared and every rational person would have quit, you three kept showing up. And if you can care that much about kids you barely know, I can at least try to give you the resources to make it mean something." She pulled out her phone, opened her banking app, and turned the screen toward them. "This is an account Roman set up for me. $5 million. No strings, no conditions, just mine to do whatever I want with." Elena took a breath. "I'm putting all of it into Meridian. Renovations, supplies, salaries, scholarships, whatever we need to turn this place into what it should have been from the start." Silence. Then Marcus, The teacher, not her ex-husband, laughed, the sound disbelieving. You're serious? Completely. Why? Sarah's voice was quiet. Why give up that much money for a charity in the Bronx that nobody cares about? Because I need to prove I can build something that isn't about revenge or power or proving someone wrong. Elena's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists. I need to know I can create something good. Just once. Even if nobody's watching. Jennifer studied her for a long moment, then uncrossed her arms. Okay, she said simply. Let's get to work. For the next 6 weeks, Elena became someone she'd never been before. Not a trophy wife. Not a strategic asset. Not a ghost hiding in suburban obscurity. Just a woman with a purpose, working 14-hour days alongside people who didn't care about her last name, or her connections, or anything except whether she'd show up tomorrow. They renovated the building top to bottom, fresh paint, new floors, windows that actually closed, heating that worked, a kitchen where kids could learn to cook, a music room with donated instruments, studios flooded with natural light. Elena learned to swing a hammer, to spackling walls, to argue with contractors who tried to overcharge until they realized she wouldn't back down. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. Parents started bringing their kids back. Enrollment climbed from 15 to 40 to 90. Local news ran a feature on the mysterious philanthropist reviving arts education in the Bronx. Donors who'd ignored Meridian for years suddenly wanted meetings. And Elena said no to most of them. Because the moment she started accepting money from people who wanted recognition, or tax breaks, or social capital, Meridian stopped being about the kids and started being about the donors. So she kept it small, kept it focused, kept it real. Roman watched from a distance. He never called, never visited, but Elena saw evidence of his protection. Contractors who suddenly offered better deals, permit approvals that should have taken months appearing in days, problems that mysteriously solved themselves before becoming crises. He'd let her go. But he hadn't stopped caring. Meanwhile, Marcus's life continued its collapse in slow motion. Whitmore and Vale had officially terminated his contract. The legal community in New York had gone cold on him. No firm wanted to touch a lawyer connected to Roman Vetrov, especially one dumb enough not to know who his own wife was. He'd moved into a studio in Queens, taking contract work for hourly rates that barely covered rent. Elena heard updates through Sarah, whose cousin worked at Marcus's old firm. She tried not to care. Tried to focus on Meridian, on the kids, on building something that mattered. But late at night, when she was alone in the Brooklyn apartment she'd finally moved into, she'd think about Marcus and feel something complicated twist in her chest. Not love, that was long dead. Not even pity, just the hollow recognition that they'd destroyed each other through different forms of blindness. He'd refused to see who she was. She'd refused to show him, and now they were both paying for it. In Trats, 7 weeks after this gala, everything changed in a single morning. Elena arrived at Meridian at 6:30 a.m. like always, unlocking the door with keys that now felt like they belonged in her hands instead of just being borrowed. She smelled smoke immediately, not fresh fire, but the acrid stench of something that had burned hours ago. Her heart stopped. She ran through the building, flipping on lights, checking rooms. In the music studio, she found it. Someone had broken in through a window, piled donated instruments in the center of the room, and set them on fire. The sprinkler system had kicked in, putting out the flames before they spread, but the damage was catastrophic. Guitars melted into twisted shapes. A donated piano warped beyond repair. Sheet music reduced to pulp. And spray-painted across the wall in dripping red letters. Go back where you came from. Elena stood frozen, staring at the destruction, feeling something cold and furious rising in her chest. Her phone rang. Roman. She answered without speaking. I heard, he said, his voice controlled but with an edge that suggested violence was being carefully leashed. I'm sending people to... No! Elena's voice was flat. Don't! Elena, someone targeted you. I know. She walked closer to the wall, studying the paint. Still wet. This had happened hours ago, maybe 3 or 4 a.m. But if you send your people, this stops being about Meridian and becomes about you. It becomes about power and territory and revenge. And I won't do that to these kids. Then what are you going to do? Elena pulled out her phone, took photos of the damage, then made a call to the fire department to file an official report. She called the insurance company. She called a restoration service. And then she called Sarah, Marcus the teacher, and Jennifer, asking them to meet her immediately. "I'm going to rebuild," Elena said into the phone. Again. Roman was quiet for a moment. "You're stronger than I thought." "No." Elena touched the burned piano, feeling heat still radiating from destroyed wood. "I'm just done running." She hung up. By 8 a.m., the entire staff was there, staring at the wreckage. Some of the kids had shown up too, word spreading fast through the neighborhood. A 13-year-old girl named Maya stood in the doorway crying silently, looking at the guitar she'd been learning to play, now nothing but twisted metal and charred wood. "Who did this?" Sarah's voice shook with rage. "I don't know." Elena knelt beside Maya, put a hand on her shoulder. "But they wanted us to give up, to decide this wasn't worth the fight. Is it?" Maya looked at her with eyes too old for 13. "Worth it, I mean. You're rich. You could do this anywhere. Why stay here where people hate you?" Elena thought about that, about how easy it would be to walk away, to take Roman's money and start over somewhere safe, somewhere people would welcome her instead of burning her work. But that was the old Elena talking, the one who ran when things got hard. "Because you're here," Elena said simply. "Because you deserve a place that doesn't give up on you just because someone else is afraid." She stood, addressing the whole group. "We're reopening in 1 week. I don't care if I have to buy every instrument myself. I don't care if we're working around the clock. These kids," she gestured at Maya and the others, "they didn't burn this place. They didn't give up, and neither will we." Jennifer wiped her eyes. "Then let's get to work." "Baptiste." The next 72 hours were chaos. Insurance adjusters, police reports, media inquiries. Elena refused to answer. She threw money at the problem, not Roman's money, but her own, the account he'd given her meant for starting over, and watched it transform into new instruments, fresh paint, restored hope. On the third day, while Elena was coordinating deliveries, Victoria Ashbourne walked through the door. Elena looked up from her clipboard, surprise and wariness flooding through her in equal measure. Victoria looked different than she had at the gala, less polished, more real, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer armor. "I heard what happened," Victoria said without preamble. "I want to help." "Why?" Elena's voice was flat. "Because I've spent the past 2 months learning who you are." Victoria moved deeper into the room, studying the renovation work. "After that night at the gala, after my father finalized the deal with Roman, I started asking questions. About you, about Meridian, about what you've been doing here." She turned back to face Elena. "You gave up millions of dollars to rebuild a charity nobody cares about, in a neighborhood everyone's written off, for kids who can't pay you back. That's not revenge. That's not strategy. That's just—" She paused. "Good. I'm not looking for redemption," Elena said carefully. "Neither am I." Victoria's smile was sad. "But I'm looking for purpose. My father's company is stable now. Roman owns 43%, but he's been a silent partner. No interference, no demands, just collecting dividends. And I've spent the past 8 weeks realizing that everything I thought mattered, the galas, the society pages, the right last name, it's all meaningless." She pulled an envelope from her bag. "I want to donate, and I want to volunteer. Help with fundraising, donor relations, whatever you need." Elena stared at her. "You understand what you're offering. If you attach your name to Meridian, people will ask questions. They'll connect you to me, to Roman, to everything Marcus did." "Good." Victoria's voice was firm. "Let them ask. Let them judge. I'm done caring about what people think when I could be doing something that actually matters." Elena took the envelope. Inside was a check for $200,000. "This is too much," she said. "It's not nearly enough." Victoria met her eyes. "Marcus destroyed both of us in different ways, but maybe we can build something better from the wreckage." For the first time since the gala, Elena smiled genuinely. "Okay," she said. "Let's try." Namsag. The reopening was scheduled for Saturday morning. By Friday night, everything was ready. New instruments lined up in the music room, art supplies stocked floor to ceiling, the charred wall repainted with a mural the kids had designed themselves, showing Phoenix rising from flames. Elena stood alone in the building at midnight, doing a final walkthrough, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Marcus stood in the doorway. Not Marcus, the teacher. Marcus Hale, her ex-husband, looking like he'd aged a decade in 2 months. His suit was rumpled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. "How did you get in?" Elena asked, her voice cold. The door was unlocked. Marcus took a step inside, his movements uncertain. "I needed to see you." "Then you wasted a trip." Elena turned back to her checklist. "I have nothing to say to you." "Please," the word came out broken. "Just 5 minutes." "No." "Elena, that's not my name anymore." She spun back toward him, anger finally breaking through the careful control she'd maintained for weeks. "You never called me Elena. You never knew that woman existed. You married Alara Quinn, a ghost, a performance, and when she stopped being useful, you threw her away like garbage." Her voice rose. "So no, Marcus, you don't get 5 minutes. You don't get to walk in here and pretend you have any claim on my time or my attention or my forgiveness." Marcus flinched like she'd hit him. "I know I don't deserve—" "You don't," Elena cut him off. "You don't deserve closure or forgiveness or peace of mind. You deserve exactly what you got. The life you built collapsing because it was always built on lies and selfishness and the belief that other people existed to serve your ambitions." "I loved you," Marcus said desperately. "No, you didn't." Elena's voice went quiet, deadly. "You loved convenience. You loved having someone make your life easier. You loved not being alone. But you never loved me because you never knew me." She moved closer, forcing him to hold her gaze. "And the worst part? I let you. I made myself small and quiet and ordinary because I was terrified that being myself would mean being alone. So I disappeared into your life and called it love." Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now. "I'm sorry. God, Elena, I'm so sorry." "I know." And she meant it. But sorry doesn't undo damage. Sorry doesn't give me back 7 years. Sorry is just something you say when you finally understand consequences. She pulled the divorce papers from her bag, the real ones this time, processed and official. "We're done, Marcus, legally, emotionally, permanently. Sign these and leave." Marcus took the papers with shaking hands. "What happens to me now?" "That's not my problem." Elena's voice was hard. "You made your choices. You live with them." "I have nothing left," Marcus whispered. "My career is dead. Victoria's gone. My reputation is destroyed. I'm living in a studio in Queens working contract jobs for $20 an hour. Everything I built is gone. Then start over." Elena turned away from him. "Stop waiting for someone to save you. Stop blaming other people for your failures. Just figure out who you are when no one's watching and become that person. It's what I had to do. And if I can't, then you don't survive." Elena's voice was almost gentle. "But that's your journey, Marcus, not mine. I'm done carrying your weight." She heard him sign the papers, heard them hit the table, heard his footsteps retreat toward the door. "For what it's worth," Marcus said from the doorway, his voice barely audible, "I'm glad you found something that matters. You deserve that." Elena didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him, just waited until his footsteps faded and the door closed, leaving her alone with the proof that sometimes the only way to kill a ghost is to stop believing in it. She picked up the signed divorce papers, folded them carefully, and put them in her bag. It was over. Really, truly over. And somehow that hurt more than she'd expected. Check. The reopening was chaos in the best possible way. 200 kids showed up, along with parents, teachers, reporters, donors, and curiosity seekers who'd heard about the woman rebuilding a Bronx charity with her own money. Elena stood back and watched Sarah run the welcome presentation, watched Jennifer guide tours through the renovated building, watched Victoria, former Manhattan socialite, sit on the floor helping a 6-year-old paint. Once. Roman arrived an hour into the event, flanked by his usual security but dressed casually, almost invisible in the crowd. He found Elena standing by the windows, watching everything unfold. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." Elena gestured at the staff, the volunteers, the kids whose laughter filled spaces that had been empty for too long. "None of this happens if you don't let me go." Roman studied her profile. Are you happy? Elena thought about that. Was she happy? She was exhausted. She was scared of what came next. She was still processing the divorce, the confrontation with Marcus, the weight of responsibility she'd taken on. But underneath all that was something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I'm getting there, she said. Roman nodded. Good. He started to walk away, then paused. Elena? Yes? If you ever need anything, not money, not power, just... He struggled with the words. Someone who knows who you really are. I'm still here. Elena turned to face him fully. I know. And Roman, thank you for everything, including the letting go part. He smiled, small, sad, genuine. You're welcome. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving Elena alone by the windows. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I signed the papers. I'm leaving New York. You were right. I need to figure out who I am without trying to impress anyone. I hope you build something extraordinary. You deserve it. M. Elena deleted the message without responding. Outside, the Bronx sun was shining, the kind of light that made even graffiti look like art. Inside, kids were laughing, creating, learning, being seen in ways they'd never been seen before. And Elena Vetrova, not hiding, not performing, not disappearing, stood in the center of something she'd built with her own hands and realized something fundamental. Revenge had been easy. This was harder. But this was real. And for the first time in her entire life, being real felt like enough. Then the windows exploded inward, glass raining down like deadly snow. And everything Elena had spent 2 months building shattered in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The sound came first, not the explosion itself, but the warning crack of glass fracturing under pressure. Elena's body reacted before her mind caught up, muscle memory from a life she'd tried to forget kicking in with brutal efficiency. She grabbed Victoria's arm and yanked her down behind a table loaded with art supplies, just as the windows detonated inward. Glass became shrapnel. The air filled with screams and the high-pitched wail of car alarms triggered by the blast. Elena's ears rang, a dull whine that drowned out everything except her own heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Dust choked the air. Someone was crying, multiple someones. The sound of children terrified and hurt blending into a chorus that made Elena's chest constrict. She forced herself up, ignoring the cuts on her arms from glass she didn't remember hitting, and scanned the room. Roman's security team had materialized from nowhere, forming a human wall around clusters of kids and pushing them toward the back exits. Sarah had blood streaming down her face from a gash above her eyebrow, but was carrying 2 children toward safety. Jennifer was on her phone, shouting addresses to emergency services. Everyone out! Elena's voice cut through the chaos. Now! Back doors! Fire exits! Move! Victoria was already on her feet, herding a group of stunned parents toward the kitchen, where the rear entrance led to an alley. Marcus, the teacher, not her ex-husband, had a little girl in his arms, her leg twisted at an angle that made Elena's stomach turn. Get them out, Elena said to Roman's head of security, a man built like a tank who'd appeared at her elbow. All of them, now. Ma'am, you need to come with... I need to make sure everyone's out. Elena pushed past him, moving through the building room by room, checking closets and bathrooms, making sure no terrified child was hiding under a desk or in a corner. Her hands were shaking. Her breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the crushing weight of knowing that whatever this was, whoever had done this, it was because of her. The music room was empty. The art studio was clear. She was heading toward the office when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the chaos. Footsteps. Deliberate. Moving toward her instead of away. Elena turned. Gerald Pittman stood in the hallway, the former board president she'd forced out 2 months ago. He looked terrible, gaunt, unshaven, his expensive blazer replaced by a stained hoodie, but his eyes were clear, focused, burning with the kind of rage that came from losing everything and deciding someone needed to pay for it. You destroyed me, he said, his voice eerily calm against the backdrop of sirens approaching outside. Elena's mind raced. Gerald had embezzled from Meridian for 3 years. She'd exposed him, forced his resignation, threatened prosecution. He'd lost his reputation, his position on 2 other nonprofit boards, his marriage when his wife discovered where the money had gone. She'd heard through Sarah that he'd been spotted around the neighborhood in recent weeks, homeless or close to it, muttering about revenge. "Gerald," Elena said carefully, keeping her voice level, "you need to leave. The police are coming." "Good." He pulled something from his pocket, a lighter, and Elena's blood turned to ice when she smelled it, gasoline soaking into his clothes, puddled on the floor around his feet. "Let them come. Let them see what you built burn. Let them see that you can't just destroy people's lives and walk away clean." "I didn't destroy your life." Elena took a step back, scanning for exits, for anything she could use as a weapon. "You did that yourself when you stole from kids who trusted you." "I gave my life to Meridian." Gerald's composure cracked, his voice rising to a roar. 20 years on that board. 20 years organizing fundraisers and begging for donations and keeping that place alive. And you walked in with your Russian Mafia money and decided I was expendable. You stole $2 million. I borrowed it. Spit flew from his mouth. I was going to pay it back. The investments were supposed to... He stopped, laughed bitterly. "It doesn't matter. Nothing matters now. You took everything from me. So I'm taking everything from you." He flicked the lighter. The flame caught instantly, racing across the gasoline-soaked floor toward the storage room, where Elena knew, God, she knew, they'd stacked boxes of donated supplies, paper and fabric and wood, everything that would burn fast and hot and turn this building into an inferno in minutes. Elena ran, not away from the fire, but toward it, toward Gerald, who stood frozen in shock as she barreled into him, knocking the lighter from his hand. They hit the floor hard, rolling through flames that licked at Elena's clothes, the heat searing even through denim. Gerald was stronger than he looked, fueled by desperation and madness. His hands found her throat, squeezing, his face contorted with rage and tears. "You should have left me alone," he gasped. "Should have let me disappear quietly. But you couldn't, could you? Had to make an example. Had to show everyone how powerful you are." Elena couldn't breathe. Her vision was tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges. She clawed at his hands, her lungs screaming, and in that moment all she could think was that she'd survived Marcus, survived Roman, survived 7 years of being someone she wasn't, only to die on a hallway floor at the hands of a broken man she'd pushed too far. Then Gerald's weight vanished. Roman hauled him off Elena with one hand, slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster, and held him there while Elena gasped for air. The fire was spreading fast now, climbing walls, eating through door frames. Smoke filled the hallway, thick and black. "Get out," Roman said to Elena, his voice deadly calm. "Now." "Not without you." Elena's voice was raw, her throat screaming. "Elena, I'm not losing anyone else today." She grabbed Roman's arm. "He's not worth it. Let him go. Let's just go." Roman looked at Gerald, at this pathetic, broken man who'd tried to burn down a building full of children because he couldn't accept responsibility for his own failures, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, not forgiveness, just the cold calculation of someone deciding whether revenge was worth the cost. He released Gerald, who slumped to the floor, coughing. "Run," Roman said to him, "while you still can." They ran. Through smoke and flames, down hallways that were collapsing behind them, out through a side door that led to an alley where emergency vehicles were screaming to a stop. Firefighters were already attacking the blaze, water arcing through shattered windows. Police were setting up perimeter tape. And in the street, huddled in blankets despite the summer heat, were all the kids and staff who'd made it out. Elena counted heads. Everyone was there. Shaken, some injured, but alive. All of them alive. She collapsed against the alley wall, her legs giving out, her body finally registering pain from a dozen cuts and burns she hadn't noticed during the chaos. Roman crouched beside her, his suit destroyed, his face smudged with soot. "You should have let me handle him," he said quietly. "Handle him how?" Elena looked at him. "Kill him? Disappear him? Turn this into exactly the kind of violence I've been trying to escape?" "He tried to murder dozens of people, Elena, including children." "I know." Elena watched the building burn, watched firefighters battle flames that had consumed the music room, the art studio, everything she'd built. But killing him wouldn't save Meridian. It would just prove that I'm still the woman who solves problems through destruction. Roman studied her face. You've changed. I had to. Elena's voice cracked. Because the old way doesn't work. It just creates more victims, more Gerald Pittmans, more people who feel justified in burning everything down because they've lost everything. So what now? Roman asked. You rebuild again? Elena looked at the ruins of Meridian, at the kids crying in the street, at Victoria sitting on a curb with her head in her hands, at Sarah being loaded into an ambulance for stitches. She thought about Gerald, probably still inside the building, either dead from smoke inhalation or in custody by now. She thought about Marcus, somewhere in another city, trying to figure out who he was without the armor of ambition. She thought about herself, Elena Vetrova, Elara Quinn, whoever she was supposed to be, and realized she was tired of running from the answer. No, she said finally, not here. Not like this. Roman's expression flickered. You're giving up? I'm choosing differently. Elena pushed herself to her feet, her body screaming in protest. Meridian was always about proving something, to you, to Marcus, to myself. But these kids don't need my proof. They need stability. They need something that isn't going to explode every time my past catches up with me. She walked towards Sarah, who was being helped out of the ambulance with a white bandage wrapped around her head. I'm so sorry, Elena said, the words inadequate and useless. Sarah looked at her with exhausted eyes. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? Elena gestured at the burning building. Gerald targeted this place because of me, because I exposed him, because I couldn't just let corruption slide and walk away. So you're saying we should have let him keep stealing? Sarah's voice had an edge. Let him destroy Meridian slowly instead of fast? At least this way, at least the past 2 months, these kids had something real. And now they have nothing. Now they have the memory of what's possible. Sarah gripped Elena's arm. You gave them 2 months of mattering, 2 months of being seen. Some of these kids, that's more than they've ever gotten from anyone. She paused. Don't you dare minimize that because one angry man tried to burn it down. Elena felt tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. What do I do now? Whatever comes next. Sarah squeezed once, then released her. But do it because it matters, not because you're trying to outrun ghosts. The investigation took 3 weeks. Gerald Pittman was found unconscious in the building, suffering from severe smoke inhalation and second-degree burns. He survived, barely, and was charged with arson, attempted murder, and a list of other crimes that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. The insurance investigation concluded that the fire was definitively arson, not negligence, which meant the payout would cover rebuilding. But Elena didn't rebuild. She transferred the insurance money and what remained of her personal funds into a trust specifically for the 3 teachers, Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer, with instructions that they could use it to restart Meridian elsewhere, under their own control, without her name attached. She wrote each of them letters explaining that Meridian had always belonged to them, to the kids, and that the best thing she could do was step back and let them build something that wasn't weighed down by her history. Victoria stayed in New York, but channeled her energy into a different nonprofit focused on youth housing. They met for coffee every Tuesday, 2 women who'd been connected through betrayal learning to build something that looked like friendship from the wreckage. Roman returned to his empire, still powerful, still dangerous, but with a different edge to his reputation now. Word had spread that he'd pulled survivors from a burning building, that he'd let a man live when the old Roman would have killed him without hesitation. People whispered that Elena Vetrova had changed him. Roman neither confirmed nor denied it. He simply continued his work, occasionally sending Elena brief texts, no words, just photos of sunsets from wherever in the world he was conducting business, reminders that he was still there if she needed him. And Marcus Hale, disappeared completely. His studio in Queens was abandoned, his contract work terminated. Jamie reported that he'd left New York entirely, no forwarding address, no social media presence, just gone. Some rumors said Philadelphia, others said California, still others that he'd gone abroad. Elena hoped, in the small part of her that still carried traces of who Elara Quinn had been, that he'd found something resembling peace. But mostly, she stopped thinking about him at all, because she was busy building something new. 6 months after the fire, Elena stood in a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, not the apartment Roman had given her, but one she'd found herself, paid for herself, claimed as her own. The top 2 floors were hers. The ground floor and basement she'd converted into something she was calling the Vetrova Initiative. Not a charity, not a nonprofit, something smaller, more focused. A consultation service for people trying to leave dangerous situations, abusive relationships, organized crime families, lives that had become cages. Elena used her connections, Roman's reluctant assistance when she asked for it, and her own hard-won knowledge to help people disappear, start over, rebuild identities in ways that actually worked. She helped a woman in her 40s escape a husband who'd controlled every aspect of her life for 20 years, setting her up with a new name and a job across the country. She helped a young man extract himself from a gang in the Bronx, leveraging Roman's influence to ensure safe passage. She helped a former corporate executive who'd witnessed fraud leave her company without retaliation, using legal channels and strategic leaks to protect her. It was slow work, unglamorous. There were no galas, no press coverage, no recognition. Just one person at a time, choosing to start over, and Elena quietly making sure they had the tools to succeed. On a cold Tuesday morning in February, nearly a year after the divorce papers had been signed, Elena was working in her office when the doorbell rang. She checked the security camera, another lesson learned from Roman, and saw a man standing on her stoop. Marcus. He looked different. Thinner, harder around the edges, his expensive suits replaced by jeans and a worn jacket. But his eyes were clearer than she'd ever seen them, like something inside had finally come into focus. Elena debated not answering. She'd moved past this, moved past him, moved past the need for closure or explanation or any final conversation that might tie up loose ends. But curiosity won. Or maybe compassion. She wasn't sure which. She opened the door. "Hi," Marcus said, his voice uncertain. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, two people who'd once promised forever, now strangers with shared history. "I shouldn't have come," Marcus said. I heard about what you're doing. The initiative. Helping people leave bad situations. And I thought..." He stopped, started again. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For letting me go." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "For not destroying me completely when you could have. For giving me the chance to figure out who I am without the career, without the ambition, without all the bullshit I used to think mattered." Elena studied him. "Did you?" "Figure it out? Some days." A small smile. "I'm teaching now. High school English in Portland. The pay is terrible, the kids are brutal, and I'm starting over at 40 with nothing to my name except student loan debt and regrets." He paused. "But I'm not pretending anymore. And that's worth more than I can explain." Elena felt something release in her chest, some final piece of anger or hurt she'd been carrying without realizing it. "I'm glad," she said, and meant it. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus hesitated. "Do you ever miss it, being a Lara Quinn, the simple life?" Elena thought about that, about morning coffee in a quiet kitchen, about the safety of being invisible, about 7 years of hiding from herself. "No," she said finally, "because Lara Quinn was never real. She was just a different kind of performance. At least now," she gestured at the building behind her, at the work she was doing, at the life she'd built from scratch. "This is mine." Marcus nodded. "Then I'm glad too." He started to turn away, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the divorce or the way I treated you, but for never asking who you really were. You deserved better than that." "We both did." Elena's voice was soft. "But we had to lose everything to figure that out." "Yeah," Marcus smiled sadly. "We did." He walked away, down the steps, into the February cold, and Elena watched him go without the weight of regret or anger or anything except the quiet recognition that some chapters end not with explosions, but with simple goodbyes. She closed the door and went back to work. Spring came slowly to New York, winter releasing its grip in increments, a degree at a time, an hour of daylight at a stretch. Elena celebrated her 32nd birthday alone in her apartment, with takeout Chinese food and a movie she'd seen a dozen times, and felt more at peace than she had in years. The Vetrova Initiative was growing. Word spread through quiet channels, therapists, lawyers, social workers, about a woman in Brooklyn who helped people disappear when staying meant dying. Elena's phone rang steadily with requests for help, and she said yes to as many as she could, building a network of resources and contacts that operated entirely off the books. On a warm evening in early May, Elena received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, old, creased, showing a young woman standing on a beach somewhere, her face turned toward the sun, smiling genuinely. On the back, in handwriting Elena recognized immediately, was a single sentence. "This is who I was before I forgot how to be happy. Thank you for reminding me it's possible. M." Elena placed the photo on her desk, a reminder that even the messiest endings could lead to something resembling peace. That night, she met Roman for dinner. Not a date. They'd tried that once, years ago, and discovered that whatever they were to each other existed outside traditional categories, but a regular appointment they'd established over the past year. Once a month, they'd sit across from each other at a quiet restaurant and talk about everything except the past. "I heard Victoria's housing initiative got a major grant," Roman said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. $3 million from a tech billionaire who wants to pretend he cares about affordable housing. Elena smiled. "She's doing good work." "And Meridian?" "Reopened last month. Different location, same staff, fully funded for 5 years. Elena sipped her wine. "Sarah sent me photos. The kids painted my name on the wall in the entrance hall. I told her to paint over it." "Did she?" "No." Elena laughed softly. She said, "I don't get to erase myself from things I helped build just because I'm uncomfortable with recognition." Roman studied her across the table. "You're happy?" It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "I'm getting there." She met his eyes. "Some days are harder than others. Some days I wake up and wonder what I'm doing, if any of this matters, if I'm just creating different problems by helping people disappear instead of facing their situations." She paused. "But most days, I know I'm doing something real, something good, and that's enough." "It's more than enough." Roman's voice was quiet. "You've become the person you were always supposed to be." "What about you?" Elena asked. "Are you happy?" Roman considered the question seriously. "I'm less angry," he said finally, "which is close enough." They finished dinner in comfortable silence. Two people who'd destroyed each other and themselves learning to exist in the same world without needing to own each other. When they parted on the street outside, Roman pulled her into a brief embrace. "Thank you," he said into her hair. "For what?" "For leaving, for coming back, for teaching me that loving someone doesn't mean keeping them." He released her, stepped back. "You saved me, Elena, even if it didn't look like that at the time." Elena felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. "We saved each other by letting go." Roman nodded once, then disappeared into a waiting car. Elena walked home through streets that smelled like spring, fresh rain and blooming trees and the electric promise of summer approaching. She passed couples arguing on corners, children playing in stoops, old men playing chess under streetlights. Life, messy and beautiful and endlessly complicated, unfolding in a million small moments that mattered more than any grand gesture ever could. When she reached her brownstone, she paused at the door, looking up at the building that housed both her home and her work, the place where she'd finally stopped running and started building. Inside, her phone showed 3 new messages. 2 people asking for help leaving situations that were slowly killing them, and one from Sarah with photos of Meridian's spring showcase, kids performing music and displaying art in a space that had risen from literal ashes. Elena made coffee, opened her laptop, and started responding to the messages. This was her life now. Not glamorous, not simple, not the fairy tale ending where the princess reclaimed her throne and everyone lived happily ever after. Just real. Just hers. Just enough. Also, 2 years later, on a blistering July afternoon, Elena stood in a courthouse in Lower Manhattan, watching a woman she'd helped escape an abusive marriage receive full custody of her 2 children. The woman, Rebecca, her name was Rebecca, had spent 18 months rebuilding her life, finding steady work, creating a stable home, proving to a skeptical judge that she was more than the terrified victim who'd fled in the night. When the judge announced the ruling, Rebecca turned to Elena with tears streaming down her face and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Elena nodded, felt her own eyes burn, and knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this woman's freedom, these children being safe, was worth every sacrifice, every loss, every painful choice that had led her here. Outside the courthouse, Elena checked her phone. A text from Victoria. Drinks tonight? I have news. Another from Roman. Congratulations on the custody ruling. You're doing important work. And one from an unknown number. My name is Jennifer Torres. My sister told me you help people who need to disappear. I need to disappear. Please help me. Elena responded to Victoria and Roman, then turned her full attention to Jennifer Torres's message. Where are you right now? She typed. Are you safe? Do you need immediate extraction or do we have time to plan? The response came quickly. Brooklyn. I'm safe for now, but not for long. Please. Elena was already moving, hailing a cab, her mind shifting into the focused calm that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. This was her life now. Saving people one at a time, building safety where there was none, offering second chances to those who thought they'd run out of options. It wasn't the revenge she'd planned. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. But standing on a New York street corner, racing towards someone who needed help, Elena Vetrova understood something fundamental about happiness. It wasn't about being seen or validated or proving you mattered. It was about mattering to someone who had no other options. It was about building something bigger than your own pain. It was about choosing, every single day, to be the person you needed when you were drowning. The cab pulled up. Elena climbed inside. Where to? The driver asked. Elena gave him an address in Brooklyn, then leaned back against the seat and watched the city blur past the windows. This impossible, brutal, beautiful city that had broken her and remade her, and finally taught her that the greatest revenge was never destroying your enemies. It was becoming unforgettable to the people you saved. And as the cab merged into traffic, carrying her toward another person who needed someone to believe in them, Elena allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Because 7 years ago, she'd stood in a kitchen in New Jersey, barefoot and invisible, preparing dinner for a man who'd already decided she was worthless. And now she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not a queen reclaiming her throne, not a ghost haunting her past, just a woman who'd learned that power wasn't about control or wealth or making others fear you. It was about choosing who you became after everything else was taken away. And Elena had chosen to become someone worth remembering, not for destruction, but for salvation. And that made all the difference.